Call this meeting to whatever you call it when it's a meeting like this, call it to order. So I'd like to welcome everyone. Good evening and thank you for attending this budget meeting. This meeting will focus primarily on the budget and how it affects the properties in the city of Nelson and areas E and F. I'm Tom Newell, Director for Area F, and I will be chairing this evening's meeting. I'd like to introduce the two staff members that are here, who will be conducting the meeting, and Joe Chirko, Yeb Maloff, and Joe Chirko, who is a general manager of rec and community and everything, to answer other questions for sure. And Director Keith Page, City of Nelson Councillor and member of our board, and Director Cheryl Graham, Area E. Welcome, and as I said, my name is Tom Newell. Please make yourself at home anywhere. Find seats if you're along there. You can see there. One of 9, we think, or maybe 10 meetings that the RD is holding budget meetings that the RD is holding this month. It was in Castlegar last evening. The format will be as follows. We'll present a slide, and then I will ask for questions and or comments from anyone here. So please ask your questions through the chair to Yeb. We'll try and keep it formal and organized in that way. For your information, directors and staff will be making notes of comments. And of course, this public meeting is for you to learn about the budget and for us to hear your feedback about the budget as we move toward finalizing the budget at the March 21st board meeting. And that at March 21st board meeting, if budget is passed, which it shall be, then that will meet the province's requirements on regional districts passing their budgets. Okay, so, when you are speaking, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and just giving your address where you live. And that's just a note I made to myself just to remind you. And so please direct all questions to staff and directors through the chair, as I mentioned. I want to ensure that people's questions are answered and that their feedback has the opportunity to be heard. So, and as such, I will allow within reason supplemental questions for clarity. So I don't want to go on and on and on about a point, but certainly if you need further clarification from Yeb or staff or a director, please feel free to ask that supplemental question. And further, I will ensure that as many voices as possible are heard, and as such, I may limit a person's time if I believe there's input from others that needs to be heard by the meeting. Please note, that this is actually far more generous. The RD, we're tooting our own horn here, but we've had 9 or 10 meetings, other regional districts, 1 or 2 meetings. So we're really trying to make sure that the public has every opportunity to hear about the budget and for us to hear their feedback. So you may feel that I'm limiting you a little bit, but in other jurisdictions, you get on a speaker's list, you have your 5 minutes to speak, and then that's the end of it. We want to try and hold a meeting where we can have a little more dialogue and delve a little deeper and get responses back and forth. So that's the spirit which we, the staff and directors, are creating, is one of openness and transparency. Just to clarify, openness does not mean that people agree with each other. Openness does not mean that you can say anything you want. Openness means that you have the space to state your view. One final procedural point that I'd like to point out is that it's a bit of a sensitive issue, but I'll word it this way. I will not allow any comments that in any way denigrate, in my opinion, denigrate staff. Now, we as directors might have to have a little bit slightly thicker skin, but only to a point. And so that's just talking about decorum, if you will. And this meeting, just to be clear, is not a debate. And so I will need to limit back and forth. It's for clarity. You can state your opinion, but that's the end of that part of the conversation once you've stated it and you have clarification from the end. And just one final note. The budget process, as you will soon learn, has been in progress for many months. Much of the budget work is done at the committee or commission level, and all of these meetings have been open to the public and thus transparent. The board itself has met and discussed this budget for 2 full days besides the aforementioned committee and commission meetings, and we'll have our 3rd meeting at the board meeting, as I mentioned, on March 21st. So with that stated, I'll turn it over to you to host this meeting. So, I don't have that. I do not have the traditional land statement. I can get it in a second. But we do acknowledge that we are meeting. I got it. We acknowledge, this is the board's acknowledgement. We acknowledge and respect the Indigenous people within whose traditional lands we are meeting today. My apologies. Oversight. Thank you, Cheryl. Okay, yep. Over to you.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you everyone for coming.
Oh, can I just say one more thing? Sure. We have people online, and so I'll be monitoring the chat function. So after a slide, if you wish to speak and you're online, and we do have some staff online as well, excuse me, I will be monitoring both things. So I'll just have to turn on I'll turn on my chat function. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Tom, and thank you everyone for coming in person today. It's really nice to see everyone. And just I'll reiterate, if somebody's having difficulty seeing one of the screens from way back there, please feel free to come up and take one of the chairs at this table. All 3 screens will have the same presentation on them. And then speaking of the virtual meeting, so we do have a camera microphone in this room that's basically sharing this room out through the meeting software. And just for transparency, some of these meetings have been reported by members of the public and posted on YouTube. So just let everyone know. And we also have a notice outside the wall that speaks to that. So just want everybody to be aware of that. If you're here, you're also here virtually in public. Okay, so tonight I'm just going to start our presentation. So I have a fairly lengthy presentation, so hopefully we could move along through it. And as Tom mentioned, we'll go through the slides. If you have a question, then Tom will I guess point in your direction or ask you to for your questions. So I'll just get the presentation started here. So the agenda for this evening is I'm going to do a quick overview of the regional district. I think that'll go away fairly soon, or maybe if you can click on it, Joe. The X in the corner there. Thank you. And maybe full size the presentation. Below, just, yeah, those arrows, no, to the, oh yeah, right. Okay, so that's, I think, as big as it gets on those screens. Oh, even better. Thank you, Joe. So we'll do a quick overview of the services. We won't assume anyone here has even a general understanding of the regional district. So we'll go through that, review 2023 in a brief summary, talk about property assessments, an outlook for 2024. We'll go through service by service for the Nelson and E and F areas, and then we'll do some graphical pie charts that will show the proportion of taxes where they go for each area in that's participating tonight, so EF and the City of Nelson. So just a reminder that this is a draft budget that was put together on February 21st. So as Tom mentioned, since then we've had various committee and commission meetings and other discussions. So the draft budget that we presented to the board, or the final draft that will be presented to the board next week, will differ from what we're presenting this evening. We chose to freeze this budget, otherwise we would have 8 more different versions between last 3 weeks ago and today. So then this way everybody's on the same page and has had the same budget to look through. And again, so there's still some adjustments that remain. These meetings, feedback from these meetings can certainly potentially influence the budget process. So we will, our plan is to have a final draft budget either at the end of this week or the first thing next week available for the board to pass next week. I'll just talk a bit about, and Tom already did, about the budget process. So we do have various meetings, whether at the board level, committee, commission level, or with directors and participants. The budget process started last October and has been an ongoing iterative process, and that culminates with at the open board meeting next Thursday, March 21st, where the final draft will be presented to the board for adoption. Even when that final draft is presented, the board has the opportunity to amend or alter that final draft depending on where and how that discussion goes. So the final draft that will be posted this in the coming week is not necessarily will be the final budget that will be passed. Okay, briefly about the regional district. So the regional district has, actually it's 200 services, and each service is accounted for individually. So if anybody's seen the budget statements, which are available online, either just for these areas or for the entire district, there's a statement for every single service, and each service basically has to stand on its own. Is taxed on its own, and we can't transfer, the regional district can't transfer surpluses and deficit or funds from surface to service if one's in a surplus or deficit. So that's sort of the major one of the major differences between the regional district and the municipality. A municipality can tax, throw it all in one big bucket and move funds around between, you know, streets and lighting and other infrastructure. So we don't have that same flexibility as a municipality does. So those 200 services basically can be put into these 8 buckets: governance and administration, so directors, finance, IT, HR, etc. Resource recovery, which is waste, recycling, and organics, recreation and parks, fire protection, sustainability, development, building inspection, water systems, and a few other services. So we'll go through those in more detail. So the regional district model, there's 2 maps there. There's one that shows the entire regional district. And so we have some services, for instance, general administration, that cover the entire regional district. So everybody, including the municipalities, are taxed for that service. And then on the right-hand side, we have all the electoral areas highlighted. So E and F are there right in the middle, surrounding Nelson. And so we have services that just individual electoral areas participate. For instance, many fire services will cover, or at least a part of an electoral area. So services can cover the entire regional district, or at the very smallest scale, some of water services only serve 8 residences and supply water to those services. So the new board was elected in October, November of 2022. So over the last year, they implemented a new strategic plan or an updated strategic plan with these 8 priorities on it. This document is now available on our, please come in and take a seat wherever you can best see one of the screens. So these are the 7 priorities in the strategic plan, and that document again is available on the website. And under each of these priorities is a set of 6 to 8 objectives. So these priorities and objectives help guide the board in their decision making, including staff initiatives and projects. So the regional district itself is a fairly highly regulated, basically service provider. So here we have, I think, over 30 different pieces of legislation in the province that to various levels impact the work of the regional district. The 2 that are circled at the top, the Local Government Act and the Community Charter, are most directly related and legislate the services and the operations of the regional district. So 2 fairly long pieces of legislation, but then we also have other acts, Employment Standards Act, Workers' Compensation, Environmental Management, etc., that basically regulate our operations. A little bit hard to read with the small writing, but this pie chart, and I'll read out a bit of it, basically splits out, it shows the share of where taxation of the regional district goes as a whole. So the blue one on the upper right, so just over 25%, almost 30%, is the 3 major rec facilities. So that's Nelson, Castlegar, and Preston. So 29% of the regional district taxation goes through those facilities. Fire and rescue is another 20, resource recovery, which is waste, organics, recycling, another 14. Other community services, which include some of these smaller arenas and community halls, is another 9. And then general admin is about 6, transit 5. So, you know, we're getting, if you add in parks, about 8, that covers about 80% of the taxation for the for the regional district. And then a bunch of, and a few other smaller buckets beyond that. And this next pie chart breaks out where our expenditures go. So I'll back up 1. So tax requisitions for the regional district are about $36 million. Our expenditures are over 70. So the difference is made up by user fees, for instance, at the rec centers, or tipping fees at the waste or transfer station facilities. And then other grants we receive, some borrowing as well. So wages and benefits make up about 40% of the expenses. Services 19, so those are contractors, consultants, etc. Miscellaneous is 9, so that's things like advertising, insurance, etc. Grants, we pay about 8% in grants, and to service the debt about 8. And then reserve contributions about 7. Before I continue on, so this presentation will be available tomorrow on the webpage for this meeting. So if anybody wants a copy of it, please feel free to download it. It should be available by tomorrow afternoon. So 2023, quick review of last year. So spending actually came in a fair bit under budget for last year. Part of that is spending on wages is low because during the year as people leave, and by the time we recruit or replace somebody, it could be up to 3 or 4 months before that position is filled, or we're just not able to recruit some positions in the middle of the year. We might say, okay, we want 20 lifeguards, we end up with 15. And then there's some savings there. But because of that, then services are either curtailed, projects are postponed, or other staff are stretched to cover. And as well, the other savings last year, or reduction in wages, was the utilities construction crew was disbanded last year. So that was a pilot project to work on our water utilities, and for the most part to replace pipe and other infrastructure. And we were just not able to recruit and hire the labor required to run that service. But even with the savings, however, user fees were down quite a bit, including items such as building permits. And so those came in under budget. So those were offset. Also, capital projects came in under budget, but that spending was offset. We didn't have to borrow as much or use reserve transfers to fund those. So any prior year surplus or deficit in the service is carried forward into the next year's budget model and is used to either reduce taxation or at the board's discretion to fund reserves. We have numerous services that run a stabilization model of reserves. For instance, building services is a good one. So we might have a really banner year for building permits, and if next year they fall off, we still need to retain our building staff, building inspection staff, to go out and service those permits. And so then we will throw some of that money into a stabilization reserves to offset the reduction of revenue in the future.
So take a pause here, just to digest a lot of information, see if anyone has a clarifying question, like to dig a little deeper. Seeing none, okay. Oh. Okay, go ahead.
Anyone else?
Go ahead, and then I'll see.
My name is Corinne Morey, Area E. In going through some of the financial statements, we noticed that in 2021 in the cash and temporary investments, there was 25,866,000 and change that was invested. Stuart Horn did let us know that it was in short-term investments through financial institutions, and some of them were local. 2022, that amount doubled to 51,908,000, which was an anomaly. Two questions. What caused the decision to put so much money into short-term investments? As I don't know that the taxpayer really wants our taxes just put into investments. And is there a portion, the second question would be, that was of 2022, so as of 2023, what is the total now that's in the short-term investments? And the third question would be, how much of that could we redistribute back to the operational fund?
Okay, yeah. All right, well, thank you. So I started in 2022, so I can't speak for 2021. And so I'll try to address the current situation. So at the regional district's investment, basically strategy and process is guided by legislation, specifically the legislation I referred to in the previous slides. The Community Charter and Local Government Act restricts our investments to basically safe investments that conserve our principal. So our investments span, so at the end of 2023, we had about $59 million in investments, and those spanned, we have some laddered GICs, we have some investments with MFA, we have and a portion of our investments in savings accounts at various banks. So last year we negotiated a fairly high interest rate, over 5%, to cover most of our bank accounts. We're making a fairly healthy return on that. So our funds are basically split between reserves and operating funds. So we have about $45 million in reserves that are attached to various services. And those are in order to get moved out of the services, that has to be approved by the board. So this budget will include some services that are contributing to reserves to increase reserves for future use. And in some cases, there's a use of those reserves or contract reserves to fund projects for this year. So there's a for the use of those reserves. The remainder of the funds are basically there for operating funds to fund the operations over the years. So the regional district, when we do our taxation, we receive the funds from the province in one big chunk in August. So the province is responsible for the taxation. That's when somebody gets a tax, except for the city's portion. So then the cities contribute, municipalities contribute their taxation to us. We get most of that in August. And then we use those funds between August and July to fund our operations. So there isn't some I don't know how to say it, some portion of unallocated funds just available to reduce taxation there. At the board's discretion, they can look at the reserves and use some of that to reduce this taxation, but that's a process that basically every committee and commission looks at, or will look at as a whole at the open budget meetings.
So then may I ask each of the three directors that are present, if we have had such a significant increase of money put into these investments, so from what I understood, you just said that there was 59 million in there now, so 2 years ago it was 25. Is there a way that the directors would look at redistributing some of that money back into operations? Would you agree to look at that?
We already have at the aforementioned commission and committee meetings, because that money is not, could be wrong, overstepping my financial skills, but it's not, I mean, it is the RD's money, but it is attached to a service, one of the 200 services that money is attached to. And each one of those commissions has looked at their reserves, their requisition, their operating budget plan for 2024, and after hours of deliberation have found the requisition needed. I think one of the things you'll find if you research in all municipalities, maybe in the world, but definitely in North America, is in fact, those reserves are way too low. We're struggling, you notice that your biggest tax bill is the community centers. And we could ask Joe how much a pool costs to run, what the life expectancy of a pool is, and how much you should be putting away every year. In fact, you could just phone Golden and ask them about their pool and the challenge they face in trying to capitalize something. So I would argue in response that $59 million is low, is too low, and should probably be 89 million, probably should be way higher, because we don't, our role is to look after you and your property and ensure that we're helping your property maintain its value. But I argue, from my perspective, I have also an equal responsibility to who owns your property in 20 years. So I'm not coming to them and saying, yeah, we didn't really fund it properly 20 years ago, so now we need 10 grand from you because we just need it. We didn't asset manage that properly. And that would be my answer to that. We've already done that process. We have already looked at all of that money and decided we are not freeing up any more than we already have from those reserves. So that's my long answer. And I'll turn it over to Cheryl if you want to keep next to it. Yeah, you don't have to answer it. It's, and as I say, we're not debating tonight. That was the answer. It's not debatable. That's the answer. Just to be clear, that's what we're doing here tonight. Go ahead, Keith, if you have some thoughts. No, you don't have to.
It's no, I think how you described it, how Tom described it is essentially but none of it. It's all the operating, it's all the funds that you're including one. And what I was kind highlight is, we had our regional parks, SAMO, E and F and G meeting not that long ago. One of the specific discussions we had was whether or not to put $20,000 or $100,000 into contributions. Part of the reporting we received at the time was talking about the docks that need to be replaced and the assets that are within the regional park infrastructure that we foresee needing to renew in the next 10, 5, 7 years, and whether or not those reserves are big enough to deal with that without having to go into a when things kind of hit the. So we had that discussion, and so far we'll see in the BEF is finalized a few weeks ago. It's 20, but that commission as a perfect example, this said to put another $80,000 in instead of reducing taxation within the S202 Regional Nelson Park cell, because we foresee that the renewal of the assets within our responsibility within those parks to keep them running will need more money than what is currently being. And part of that is I haven't been around the table all of the time, but I understand that there really was a change in thinking come the 2000s and taking that across institutions on what asset management looks like. People across a lot of organizations were just not making the investments they needed to renew the infrastructure. And we're all bearing the brunt of that responsibility now. And so we can kind of swear ourselves to do it and take the biggest bite out we can for ourselves and for the future. Or, we cannot do best practice. We learned better. So this is like, and I say we, it's like everybody running Canadian organizations has learned better, understands we need to make those investments in that renewal of that infrastructure. So people will have talks and boat launches and park furniture and gazebos.
All right. So, I'm turning it over to you, but so this is the answer to your question. There'll be no supplemental. We've spent a long time on this. I did see a question back there, so we will get to your question, but I'm going to allow comments since we've had our chance.
Yeah, so with that being said, we did move some reserves into operations from some services in our discussions so far. I can't remember the exact amounts or which services they were, but I know $100,000 went out of one service. So we were moving some reserves into operations. It hasn't all been, we're just gonna move money into reserves and not to go the other way. It depended on which service. So we've done both. Okay?
Yeah, that's it. So please, I saw your hand first. Please, and please, who you are, where you live, and stand up if you would, just so we can hear you.
My name is Anka Dawson. I live in Area E. And my question was related to the reserve because I didn't understand and you said clarity. I know it's a long time, but the reserve fund is for only one service or it's for more services?
This 59 million would be spread out over the 200 services that get mentioned.
For the reserve.
Yeah.
So then it is possible, as Sharon said, so to move it between services from in and out.
No, you cannot do that. You cannot.
To move in between the fund, the reserve and the operational.
Yes, you can. That's the discussion we have at every budget meeting, at every commission, every year. And we make a decision based on our expertise, staff's recommendations on how much we contribute, basically, how much are we going to contribute to reserves this year? Which could mean we can pull some out because we don't need to contribute. But we make that decision, and what we've learned is, over time, we have under-contributed. And if any of you rural people are on water systems with 10, 15, 20, 30 people, you are 90% of you are underfunded your water system and probably don't have the $200,000 you should have in the bank or 300. Asset management is a problem. Anyway, I'm going on. I made my point.
I know the water system, but what I wanted to say something, because I heard a question about 2021, 2022, and the director said that was not there in 2021. I thought that there is a statistic, as you said, over time that would decide every year, maybe, or for a period like was done in the past, for a period of 5 years, we are gonna have to have this amount in the reserves.
Yes, we're doing that.
That
And we
is,
should have a formal report this summer to really update it. And hopefully we'll have a policy that we will never have this discussion at budget meetings because we'll be mandated to contribute this amount to each service for asset management. So if I could, I'd like to just move on. We covered reserves and MF and restrictions on how we can invest those reserves. And was there another question on this topic or this screen? Yes, Brian, go
On
ahead.
the screen, just going, Brian Waffen, Area E. Prior year surplus, I'm just wondering, what is the prior year surplus? And is affect taxes? What is the percentage of taxes, like I know taxing on 12%, they could have gone up 14, I'm just wondering, what is the percentage, how has it affected our taxes? And what is the prior surplus?
Goes by service.
Okay, well,
And as you have said, if all the money wasn't spent that we thought we were going to spend in the service, that's a surplus. That money is owed to the people and the directors need to decide where that extra money goes. And it's got two choices, reserve or reduce taxation. And that's the discussion we have at all our open, public, transparent commission meetings as we discuss budget.
percentage of those, like how much has gone to reserve?
We couldn't answer that. There's 200 services.
Or just do like waste management.
Yeah, exactly. No, we can't, be too complicated to answer something like that. I think. So. Yeah, that. Go ahead, and then,
My name is Mike Casper, I live in Spokane Park. I've been sitting in these meetings for a while and up until today, there's been 186 services, the slide says that. So where are the extra 14 services?
yes, I don't know.
Sorry, through the chair, so that number's from a previous presentation, so we counted again this week and it's 200. So updated to 200.
Thanks for asking that. Yeah, because I'd always gone with
Yeah,
186.
and that includes the allocation services, so
Cannot.
we used to not count those, but we have the allocation services, basically they're the services that they aren't directly taxed, but they are buckets that, for instance, recycling, organics, community services, environmental. So they give a clear picture for those, instead of burying those costs into and divvying them up between the services that pay into them, we can then now track the performance of those allocation services, and that's why they're set up. And we're now including them in our account.
So something like recycle easy would be for that?
Through the chair, yeah, our recycling service, so each sub-regional resource recovery service has an associated recycling service.
That's some of those extra ones?
Yeah, those are those extra ones. So
Yes.
so then you could look at that and you could see, what is the cost of running our recycling and what is required to cover those costs.
Thank you.
Thank you, good question. All good questions, of course. Thank you for the question.
Presumably, like wages in the pie, the biggest slice of the pie is wages. Do you attach a surplus reserve to that as well?
No, not directly. So wages are one of our expenses. So when reserve decisions are made service by service, that whole service is looked as a whole. So all the expenses in that services, the projections for asset management for that service. So we don't just look at that year that's spending. We'll look 3, 4, 5, 10 years down the road, and especially in our larger rec centers, we have asset management plans, and we do sort of a cash forecast, and we do reserve management. So that depending on the service, there's a number of different approaches why those reserves will go up and down, whether a contribution to them or not. There's no reserve that's specifically tied to wages in any service.
Great. All right, next slide. Thanks.
Okay, so we'll switch over now to, this isn't up for some reason.
Come on.
So you are. Get it going. I'll just share again, Joe. Let's see if that.
There it is.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll now go over property assessment changes, which can be a complicated topic. So we'll try to simplify it a bit, but we can. So we'll start with. So basically, there's smaller increases this year compared to previous years. So we've seen some fairly significant increases in property valuations. So that those numbers are down this year. And so does that mean your taxation will go up by the same amount that your assessment is? No, it doesn't. We'll touch upon that a bit later. And one thing to know about property assessments for an area as a whole, so the assessment value is to think about it in two ways: a market and non-market change, assessment change. So market is the assessment change that's driven by basically real estate sales and the values that that real estate is sold as. So that changes the value of the current properties. And the other thing that could impact the total dollars of assessment for an area is new construction. So if there's a bunch of new construction going on, the overall tax base or assessment base for that area will increase. So we can actually separate that, and I'll show that in a couple slides. So how are property taxes for regional district services calculated? So for each service, either through the commission process with the involvement of staff, various other discussions, a tax requisition amount is worked out to fund that particular service. So to fund the expenses, and so that taxation might be offset a bit by some revenues, but anyway, the taxation is derived for each service. And as a regional district, each service, basically, we can't run a project a surplus, or sorry, a deficit for sure, and very rarely a surplus, if ever. And so if you look at our budget statements, each statement in the budget line balances out to zero. So we go through that process, again, through committee, commission, or board level meetings. And independently of that, the province, through the assessment authority, derives the property values. So when we're looking what taxation or our committees and commissions are and staff, the required taxation for a service, we don't look at, oh, the assessment base has gone up. We can now increase taxation. That's not part of our process. So two separate processes. And then when you combine those, then you get the tax rate per thousand. And the regional district, every single tax service has its own tax rate. Most services do. Some services are funded by parcel taxes, but any that are funded on assessment base, we can work out a tax rate per thousand. And again, going back to the difference with municipalities, municipality will come up with one tax rate per thousand for all of their services for the entire city, whereas we will come up with 150 or more tax rates for our various services. And then for each property, you multiply that tax rate for the assessed value of each property, and then you can calculate the property tax for each service for each individual property. Okay.
Which you will note on your tax assessment that you receive will have maybe 7 or 8 categories. It'll have school, it'll have police, regional hospital, and then it'll have RDCK, and then it'll have North Shore Fire, for instance. So some of it is broken out on your actual bill that you get.
Right, thank you. So this table here is of the assessment changes from 23 to 24 for E, F, and the city of Nelson. So the total change, so E increased by 2%. F actually went down by 1, and the city of Nelson assessment went up, values went up by 3. And in each of those, we can split it between market and non-market. E assessment increase is basically all new, mostly new construction. A mix for F, and the city of Nelson is 1% for market and 1.8 for non-market. So this next bar graph, so the blue bars are the 1 year percentage change in assessment. So year over year, so basically that last table we looked at. And then the orange are the 8-year average, compounded average for each area municipality. And if you look at this graph, there's a couple interesting things to note. If you look at any 1 year in particular, the range could be quite wide, all the way from -2 to almost 15, so about a 17% range. But if you look over an 8-year period, Slocan's a bit of an outlier, you're looking only about a 5% difference. So a little bit of a regression to sort of a mean or average. And a little bit, and then some of that is spelled out. You can see Nelson, E, and F are now on the far left. So this is by the sorted by the 1 year increase. So a few years ago, Nelson, E, and F were on the far left of this. So their values are increasing far more than the further out rural areas and smaller municipalities. So that sort of flipped now over the last year or two. So Area D particularly is, and Slocan and North are seeing, including Area K, are now seeing those larger increases. So a bit of a catch up. So it's really interesting to see how these assessment valuations change, total assessments change over time. And I'll make a comment here too, is I'll introduce something called assessment shift. So what happens is if one area's municipalities assessment for that year on average goes up more than another's, any service that they share, that municipality or area will take on a greater share, a greater proportion of property taxes. So, for instance, all municipalities and areas participate in general admin. Well, Area D is going to take a proportionally greater share this year of general admin costs than Nelson, E, and F are. So there's over year, there's ebbs and flows as to how this occurs. And so these are averages for an area. But if you look at your own property, if this is the same principle applies, if the value of your property proportion went up greater than your neighbors by percentage, you're going to take a greater share of taxes now than your neighbor is. So if yours went up 15%, your neighbors went up 5%. For all those services, and then you're going to share most services, you're going to now take a greater share of that taxation. So that's what we refer to as taxation shift.
So pause here, a lot of information, interesting information, just let people digest it and see if some question comes to mind. The example was for area at, oh, please go ahead, stand up, who you are and what would you like to ask? Go ahead.
I just got a question here. When you're looking at the taxes, and I've noticed over time, I've had my place since '92, the assessments are all over the map. There's no consistency whatsoever. Does the RDCK have any voice into BC assessment to say, work this out? Because some of them are just ridiculous. Way too low, way too high. I would bet that most of these properties have never even been walked through or actually seen to see what's there. So I'm just wondering, does the RDCK have a voice to BC assessment?
Short answer, no.
Nothing at all.
Nothing at all. So it's up to individual property owners to challenge or appeal their assessments, and that deadline, I believe, is January 31st each year. Just found out last week, I didn't realize this was happening, but the BC assessment, I don't know if any of you received this, is doing a bit of a survey. So I know residents in Area A have received surveys from BC Assessment. So there's a bit of a process going on. I don't know how wide that's going to go or what impact it's going to have. And I don't know how often they do that. So there's another process that BC Assessment's going through. So we really have no say or impact on how BC Assessment does its evaluations.
I just have observed over time, and I think it's dramatically unfair in our Kootenai area. And I think it penalizes a lot of people. And, you know, maybe people are benefiting from that, and that's great, happy for them to have that. But trying to get feedback to BC Assessment is a really highly resistant thing as well. So we don't really have a voice on assessments at all. And I don't feel this area is handled very well. So, you know, obviously you can't do anything about it, but it would be nice if we did have a voice there. As
Thank you.
RDC.
Thank you. Yes, we do hear that. I was going to tell a story while there was a lull, but maybe the lull was filled, so I'll pass on the story, but it has to do with Area F. I'll tell the story. We share Rec 5 and with half of the City of Nelson, all of Area F. Area F went up 15%, the City E went up 7%. That year, we set the requisition increase for Rec 5 at 2%. Area F paid 5% more that year in our contribution to Rec 5, simply because of the assessment difference. Real life example. Yeah.
Okay, so just a quick table again about those assessment change increases of 1.69 and actually a reduction in area this year. Okay, so speaking of property tax bills, this is an example from a few years ago from a resident in Area F. And so basically, again, it'll show as Tom mentioned, some school taxes, some other taxes that are covered, but there'll be one line for, it says F Central Kootenai. So those are services that everybody in Area F participates. So all of those services will be on one line. And then you'll have a few other lines, depending where you live in Area F, sort of those defined area services. So if you have fire coverage somewhere in Area F, you'll have a line for that. If you're in a water system, you'll have another line for that. If you're participating in a rec service, there'll be another line. So your tax bill will show you your taxation for those defined area services, and then one line for the other the services as a whole.
Any question? Okay.
Okay, another table, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but these tables are, they're in our budget documents, both again for the consolidated budget and the EF and Nelson budget packages. And we call these the cover sheets, and they basically for each area, and this is for, we've got Area EF right now. This table shows the services that everybody or every property in Area E participates in. So and it shows the change from 23 to 24 in assessment and in requisition. So in this one table, you can look at and see for Area E, where are the largest differences at each service in requisition. So this shows that, and again, it shows all these services everyone participates in.
I have.
Yeah, we have two questions. So I saw your hand first, Green, so please go ahead.
Noticed in the budget that there was 2 expense accounts that weren't listed, 206 and 207. We had asked for clarification because I think Cheryl had checked and that there was some funds in one of them. So could we find out what those 2 accounts are for and if there's funds in there that aren't being used Did they be used elsewhere?
Yeah, Joe, that's right. Joe gave a great answer to 207, yes.
Yeah, so 206 is the Casper K Regional Park Service.
Can you speak up, Joe, just so everyone?
Geez,
Sorry, you're in school now.
I get told to.
We don't have to.
No, we don't have to.
S206 is the Area K Regional Park Service, so that they don't have it. So that service bylaw is there in case they decide at some point to have a regional park, but there is no taxation for it. So that's why that service doesn't have it anymore. S207 is the old, it's what used to be called the defined Area E, Area F recreational something area. But essentially where that service came from was the Morning Mountain ski hill. So when Morning Mountain was operating, there was actually taxation that supported that ski hill. Then the ski hill closed, but if everybody remembers, somebody may not remember, some of us that have been around here a long time do, the lodge burned down. And there was an insurance payout. So that insurance payout has been a part of a reserve ever since. So in years past, there has been taxation in S207. At one point in time, Morning Mountain, that recreation area was operated separately, but the Nelson EFG Regional Park Service voted to include that as a regional park. So that took that burden off of those taxpayers. So there is no taxation for it. But that reserve fund in the past has been used for a number of different projects. The most recent one being the research into was there a viable place to put in a boat launch? So that is where it is. So right now, you guys may remember the email letter about, I believe it's about $14,000. 20,
Yeah,
okay.
but it might be.
14, it must be a different one. 20,000 that's still sitting in reserve. And so we hold that money in that reserve. That's at the discretion of the director for Area E and Area F. If there's more research that they want to do in that area, or other things that they want to fund. But there's no taxation for it, so that's why it doesn't show up in the financial plan. Oh, sorry, and it's not even that there's no taxation. There's no expected budget expenditures, so that's why it doesn't show up. Because we do have services every once in a while that are funded from past reserves, and so they would still show up in the financial plan if we have a plan to spend money in it. But we don't have it this year versus 2. Correct.
There was another question I can't remember. Oh, go ahead, please.
Try to be quick.
No problem.
If we as taxpayers manage to get a service stopped, what happens to its reserve? And I think you could have just answered it. We don't get the money back.
No.
I'm gonna pause for a moment. That's a good question. Someone online is not muted and it's creating a bit of background noise. Can we
Tom,
find
it's
out?
the number ending in 16.
The
Whoever's number is ending in
16. 12506 ending in 16. Can you please, thank you.
I think I just moved it.
Okay,
Thank
you're
you.
muted. Thank you. Please go ahead, whoever was talking.
Sorry, so thank you. Through the chair, no. So for example, we actually have a recent example of this, North Shore Hall. Do you want?
No, you don't.
Okay. So, North Shore Hall used to be a defined area, essentially Johnson Road, essentially paid taxation at North Shore Hall. It was $5,000 a year, I believe, was the taxation amount. And when we stopped taxing in that service for it, there was a small reserve in that old configuration. And that was returned to the taxpayers. It showed up as a small credit.
Okay, thank you. So that's the normal course of events, because
No, maybe it's one of the choices that could happen. I don't know, because it just depends upon whether the directors feel, so the board, sorry, I shouldn't say the directors, because in the end, it's the board. If the board feels that that service still maybe has a potential future value to it, like there might be a reason for it, then they may not, do that.
Okay, so the reason I asked the question, because so it either is used for something else, because I thought we couldn't transfer stuff between services, so
No.
I was a little bit confused about why would a reserve from one thing all of a sudden now?
Oh, sorry.
To find other stuff.
Yeah, sorry, the reserve, so each reserve in the regional district is attached to a service.
Right.
So for example, that $20,000 for S207 can only be used in S207. So that has to be, so that's why there's no budget for it this year. So it doesn't show up in the financial plan, which means that that reserve is just staying in the reserve. If there was a project plan, like let's say, the community wanted us to look at something else. In the past, most recently, it's been about a boat launch on the lower part of, the river, the low, Roman Narrows. If they wanted that, we could draw from that reserve on that study, and we would have to then budget for it in S207.
Good, thank you.
Good question. Good clarification. All right, onward. We have no further questions that I've seen, so go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so this next slide is the table for the defined service areas for electoral area E. So these, I'll just go back one slide. And if you look at the assessment value, it's all the same here. It's about 169, well, it's 169 million, but it's larger than that. But on here, it's $169 million assessment for area E for everyone. And if you look at these defined areas, all the assessments are different because it's for each one of these services, it's a different group of properties that's participating in this service. So there's 3 different fire protection services, depending where you live in area E. You're going to participate in a different fire protection service, and whether you have water utility or not, and not everybody again operates or is part of Rec Commission 10, as is shown here. So this is the bottom half of that previous table. These are the defined area services for area E. And so the next is area F, so similar layout. Again, showing the assessment change and requisition change. And these are the services everyone in F participates in. And here's a list of defined area services for F. Oh,
Yes, Joe.
You have some questions?
Online? Raised hands. Okay, it's hard to, yeah, thanks. Just give me Ellen,
It's,
please ask your question, Ellen.
okay, it's Ellen Schmidt speaking from Balfour, and I'm referring to the chart for Area E. I'm particularly referring to the service S279 yes. Sorry, I didn't get my hand up quickly enough
No
before
problem.
you'd moved on. I know there's a lot of material to go through. There you are. I see that the usual taxation amount for Area E, going back decades, is identified, the $1,000 amount. I am concerned that this document does not represent the undertaking made by Commissioner Graham to fund Recreation Commission 10, the service that's funded by S279. Through community development grants, that's not reflected in it. And it's not reflected further in the detail page, which is number 192 in your large report. So I would simply like to point that out, that Commissioner Graham is committed to find a solution for the funding of recreation projects in Area E, but it is not reflected in this document.
Yeah, Director Graham would like to comment, Ellen. So
Thank you.
please go
I
ahead.
appreciate that.
Yeah, actually Joe, and myself were discussing this just prior to the meeting today as well. And Joe is working with me to determine a new model for Rec 10 that should be similar to the Rec 9 model. And I have, put basically funding aside in our community development funding that is intended to fund a new model, which is in development. And the $1,000 taxation will stay in place. And I guess that's, unless you have another comment to that, Joe? No? Okay. So it's a work in progress.
Great. Okay. Ellen, do you mind lowering your hand? And do you have a supplemental? Or did that?
No, I don't.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Leo.
Thank you. I'll jump forward. I think the city of Nelson. So these are the services that all of the property owners or residents in the city of Nelson participate in. So it's a smaller list, but some fairly large services in there, including the S226, which is the community facilities, including the rec center, and as well as refuse disposal, which is like 187, the waste, organics and recycling. And for the city of Nelson, there are no defined service areas for the regional district. Everybody in the city of Nelson, all property owners participate in this list of services. So on our behalf, the city of Nelson collects the taxation, and then from its property owners, and then that's forwarded to the regional district to fund these services.
I'm going to pause for a moment. Kim, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, I would. Thank you.
Please go ahead, Kim.
It's also referring to Service 279, but it probably applies to other services as well. So when there is a prior year surplus, and in particular 279 on the budget, it's not showing on your graph here, but when I look at the actual budget on page 192, there's been a prior year surplus of 10,400 and change, and there's nothing in the upcoming draft budget. Where does that prior year surplus go if it's not going to be put in the budget? Does it just go back into general funds? Does this happen with other services too, where there's a prior year surplus but is not going to be put into the following budget? So in particular with S279, where is that surplus going?
Yeah, through the chair.
Go ahead, Joe.
I haven't discussed with Director Graham yet, but as S279 was actually, so S279 had a small taxation of $1,000, and then the rest of the money was funded by community development. Throughout in the mid portion of the year, we have to make an estimation to the end of the year for the community development grant. We overestimated that amount for the community development grant. So we have excess funds there, that's correct. If after some discussions that I had with Director Graham, the most logical thing to do is to return that back to Area E Community Development Grant funds. But that's a conversation that we have to have once the audit is complete, and we know that that's the actual final number for 2023.
Thank you.
I just got one quick
Supplemental, go ahead, Kim.
Yeah, supplemental, please. So Joe, when the recreation funds were coming out of community development funds, is that not normally in the budget then as a budget number?
Yeah, so through the chair, the budget has an amount in it that estimated what that community development might be. As we got to the end of the year, so Kim's on Rec 10, so I make a guess towards in September. I can't remember when I did that. I think I did it in September. I made the application. So at that point in time, I do my best to guess what the grants might be that are given out by Reg 10, what the other expenses might be, and I do that I write that community development grant. When the moment that grant is approved by the board, it is put into the service. And then at the end of the year, it's either like in the years where Rec 10 has operated, it continued as a surplus into the next year, which just meant that the community development grant would be less the next year. But in this case, because the service isn't operating as normal, that will be a conversation about moving that money back into community development so that it's available for grants to Area E, to the grants for the Area E community development grant be awarded in 2024.
Well, welcome. Could you lower your hand, Kim, please, just to help the chair know what the heck's going on? Thank you. Okay, yeah, take it away.
Okay, just this table showing the change in tax requisition rates for overall average for City of Nelson E and F. So a 5, 9, and 7% increase in the rate per thousand. So this next table here has got a whole bunch of columns in it, but we'll just focus on the very far left and the very far right. And so to the left are the areas and the municipalities. And the very far right is the overall taxation change for the average taxation change for each area municipality. So in this case, we show 9% for Area E, 5.5 for F, and 8.6 for Nelson. So this is for the regional district portion of the taxes. So this is the total change, including market and non-market. So you can take off a percent and a bit for the non-market portion. So an existing property owner would see around an 8, 4, and 7 something increase in taxes.
Question?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Green Area E, so as far as I understand, Area E has the least amount of services. So I was wondering why it has the biggest increase in taxation.
Go ahead.
Good question. No, yeah.
Good question. So it really depends what services it participates in. So you can participate in one service, and if that one service has a 25% increase, then your area is going to see a 25% increase.
So would you be able to specify which service it is that has caused this increase? Because basically we don't have any services. We have the rec center, we have fire, pretty well everything else where we've opted out of. So I just even give one example of what has caused that increase.
Right, so here's the list of services that everybody in Area E participates in. So the largest services are the refuse disposal. I have to look on here, that's a little fuzzy to read, about $687,000. So that shows a increase of the previous year, I think just over 10%. There's recreation and parks, which is showing more than a 10% increase. So it really depends on the services, but if we also remember Area E had a greater increase in property values than F and the City of Nelson did. So Area E now is picking up a greater proportion of all these services that it shares with E as areas F and the City of Nelson. So that assessment shift is going to increase taxation in Area E and reduce or not increase it as much in F and the City of Nelson. So if we, so sorry, I just correct myself. E had a greater share increase than F. So it's picking up a greater share of those shared services.
And if because Area E is one part of Area E does not contribute to the biggest tax burden in the other part, the community complex. It's hard to say Area E. You really have to do Area E kind of Blewett and Area E Balfour to get a true reading. And this is a blended reading when you talk about just Area E, or at least the shared services. Someone else that's in the defined Area E that contributes to the community complex will have a different percentage reading than someone in Balfour.
So to clarify then, in Area E, not all Area E residents are paying the same for the rec center.
Some are paying zero.
Who's paying zero?
Anything Balfour, anything from the provincial park through to Balfour site. Okay. So it's a defined E, was the referendum in 2003 that did not include Proctor Harrod Balfour.
Only Blewett.
Yeah.
Mountain Station and Gilby Point as well.
Yeah.
And just one comment here,
Yeah, go ahead.
Corinne too. Our assessment in Area E in 2024, the completed is 169 million. Area F is 155 million. Area E's total tax is 3.2 million. Area F is 3.5. So their assessments, it's actually like lower, but their taxes paid are higher. So their increase is lower, but just overall, just in a big picture situation, just so you understand. And that's largely because of what Tom just said, that parts of Area E are not paying into the Nelson District service of Rec 5. Largely, not entirely.
Library as well.
Yeah,
Yeah, so and further to Director Graham's notes, this is the point there. So Area F has got a fairly, a larger taxation rate per thousand than Area E does.
Yeah, thanks. That's good. Oh, another question. Sorry, Brian. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering about the permits and the zoning changes that are coming down the line. I think we're talking about them now. I know the city council, I wrote a letter to the city council members here today. I hope to get a response. And I'm just saying the zoning changes, do they affect the regional district? Like the new zoning changes that are?
You mean the housing and the short-term rentals? We have not received a report yet from staff. They are still deciphering the information that came out as a news release, and more details are slowly evolving. The places that have gone forward with it already had plans in place, like Kelowna. So for us, it'll be in the rural areas. We're still waiting to see what the impacts will be.
Impacts, like, I mean, that in terms of like getting the budget sorted out, impacts like environmental impacts, I mean, I think need to be calculated, are huge in the zoning proposals, because environmental impacts of water, sewer, drainage, parking, including green areas. If these new zoning bylaws come through, a property developed person could say, oh, I want 4, 5, 6 plex, or just wipe out all the trees. I mean,
No, that the RD, we will be going through it,
yeah,
but we also are partners with IHA when it comes to any kind of development and densification, simply because of not simply because, but their requirements, septic and potable water, create their own limitations that we are beginning to work with. So we'll see what the zoning things, we're waiting for reports from staff.
yeah.
And I thought you were more talking about the short-term rental and that kind of thing, and we're still waiting on that. So we don't have an answer yet.
Who's gonna pay for all the extra infrastructure and stuff like that? And in terms of like thinking of this, thinking of all the infrastructure costs, I think we need to be thinking of it in this budget, is that if we're gonna be thinking about these rezoning changes on each property, we're gonna be building duplexes and triplexes on every property in this whole area. We have to start thinking about it. How is that gonna be affected in this budget? And that's gonna affect how we're gonna be deciding
And
We can't put it in this budget, and it actually will fall upon the developer to meet the requirements of IHA, et cetera, and the RD, and we haven't made the changes. And Keith, please, you want to make a comment?
What I was gonna say, those impacts for by right densification for 3 or 4 come down to communities of a certain size being 10,000. Area E, certainly there are 10,000 people in Area E, but they're not a community. It's defined by that legislation, about 10,000 subject to the requirements. But the secondary requirement is you might have by right the ability to do 3 or 4 units. You still have an obligation to meet the septic and water standards because you're the developer developing the units. We are not required to bring in services to have that project done. And so that also then creates this reality that means you are both are subject to the red legislation in the rural area, but also you have to meet the septic requirements. And that means you'd have to build a system if you wanted to build a system, which is the same setup we have and exists currently.
In other words, if I want to build a triplex, I can only use the same amount of water that the duplexes will use, or have some sort of, is that right?
Brian, we're going,
He's talking city of Nelson. You guys have
well,
different
we're,
locations.
Brian, we're going down a path. The short answer is there's no changes. And IHA will require you to supply water, and there'll be more to come if those are incorporated into official community plans in each of the electoral areas as we move forward. So there's really, at this point, no answer. It's complete speculation. Okay, so can we leave it there for now? And
Sure.
yeah. Go ahead, Neil.
Okay, so we'll touch upon the overall outlook for 2024. So as shown previously, the projected overall requisition increase is 9.3% in this draft budget. And then if you exclude the new development, the net average change for existing property owners is 7.9%. So the budget incorporates a consumer price index inflation increase for staff salaries and director stipends of 6.2%. For directors, that's based on bylaw from the previous board. For staff salaries, that's based on the terms and conditions of employment, which each employee, it's to be driven by inflation. So that's the average that's used is actually effectively a 2-year average. So this year is a catch up from about 2 years ago. So if you remember, 2 years ago, inflation was running 7 or 8%. At that point in time, regional district employees received a relatively low increase of 4. Inflation is now decreased. So it's by reason 2-year average. So it's at 6.2. And then we were asked to look back and say, is inflation a good measure or a fair measure to tie salary or wage increases to? So we looked at
a wage based on inflation, not production.
Yeah.
So we look back both at 24 and 7-year periods, and
Sorry.
7% wage.
Tom, the number ending in 74, if you guys can mute, that would be helpful.
Thank you, Director. Joe was going to do it here, but that's helpful. 74, ending in 74.
there we go.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, thanks.
And basically in the broader public sector, wage increases have matched inflation going back 7 and 24-year periods.
Yeah, well, when I did that, I just thought the share. Should we share?
Okay,
Sorry.
yeah, no worries, I could do that.
Oh, that's okay, it's right here.
Is it there? Okay, thank you, Joe. As part of the budget as well, inflation and supply chains constraints continue to have a cost impact across the many services and projects and initiatives. And in many cases, those inflation of those purchases exceed the published CPI rate. So As you're well aware, you know, the CPI rates range sort of 4 to 5%. Many items that you go out and buy are going up more than that, but that's the same thing for many of our purchases, especially in areas for like contractor services. I spoke with our capital projects manager a couple weeks ago, and going out to bid and things like that, and discussions, preliminary discussions with contractors. Their costs have gone way up, and including if they're having to buy new equipment, cost of that equipment has gone up. Their borrowing costs and leasing costs have gone up, and they're basically forced to transfer those increases onto us. He also mentioned PVC piping costs are gone up more than 20% over last year. So items as such of those are built into this budget and are also driving some of those cost increases. Another increase is interest rates have gone way up over the last few years. So a couple, 3 years ago, we were borrowing at 1.5%. We are now borrowing closer to 5%. So that's affecting many of our services, both for short-term and long-term borrowing costs. There's a partial offset from that with increased investment income, and that investment income, if it's most of it's related to reserves, is put back into reserves. With the purpose of that is hoping that those reserves at least try to keep up with inflation. So that's why most of that investment income is put back into reserves. And as we talked about at the beginning of the meeting, asset management planning and longer term planning, we are going through a process right now with a consultant, asset management consultant, to help us put an asset management plan in place. So we're expecting the results of that for that report in the coming months.
Any questions on 2024 overall outlook? Yes, go ahead.
I have a question.
Oh, please go ahead. What was your name? Sorry, Bob. Bob.
I have a question about the increase in salaries. You said it was what percent?
6.2%.
So I don't think that increasing everybody's salary by 6% is fair and equitable. Somebody, if they're making 50,000, someone's making 150,000. The percentage disparity just makes a bigger disparity in the economic and return that somebody gets in the pocket. In other words, that if for easy figuring, if somebody's at 50,000 and they get a 10% increase, that's $5,000. Somebody's at 150,000 gets 10% increase, that's 15,000. That just creates more of a gap within an organization or a business, which shows more disparity of who is getting fairly reimbursed for the job they do. I think that it's fair to have increases based on an amount.
Yes.
Percentage.
Thanks for that. And being in the union business for years, it's an interesting perspective and one we looked at, I know, in some of our negotiations, and it's very valid point. We'll pass that on to our HR department. Connie just saying that comment came, and see what the staff think about it in negotiations.
Yeah.
Joe does a lot of negotiations, having amongst the most staff in the regional district with all the rec centers and what have you. Do you have a comment, Joe, or did you just hear that?
So just this is kind of a different piece than just to clarify. So we have a mix of salaried employees who have a terms and conditions of employment where the 6.2 or the inflation rate is built into the change, but then we also have a contingent of union employees where we go through a negotiation process, which we'll be doing this year, Joe, which is different than the salary staff increases. But again, to Tom's point, I appreciate the comment, Bob, and we'll relay that to our HR department.
Thanks. Yes, Kareem, go ahead, please.
So, in terms of the invested amount, and I've heard you say that it's safer for the regional district and the assets if we continue to make sure that we are creating a more robust, reserve fund that's in investments. I'm just wondering, what is the structure or process that the board has created to give them guidance as to when they should be accessing that money rather than continuing to fund it? Because you could always take the position that even though we have 59 million, it's not enough. And so we're gonna have to keep putting more into it. What have you created for the process to determine that this is when we access those funds rather than continuing to inflate them?
Yeah, through the chair, I think Tom addressed a lot of that earlier. So right now it's on a service by service discussion at the committee or largely the commission level. What will happen to those reserves or reserve contributions? We have a number of services where it's part of the policy or bylaw that service that says half of the surplus will go into reserve. So some services are driven by bylaw what happens to the reserve. But as we mentioned earlier, this asset management program, and Tom mentioned, the planning process of it, hopefully somewhere down the road, we'll come up with an overall, if not policy, at least guidelines about what we're to do with surpluses and reserves and funding levels. And as Tom mentioned, it's likely it's going to be a little bit of an eye opener. And I mean, this happens. Not just the regional district. When you look forward and do a wholesome plan, you will find often that reserves are maybe not at the optimal levels. And I think one extreme example, if you read the news, I think the town of Suyas is looking at over 30% taxation increases because they weren't funding their reserves to the appropriate level. And again, we have some services that did fall behind. And for instance, in the Castlegar area, they thought they had healthy reserves. Inflation hit. Some major capital projects came in at once, and now the residents of Castlegar, I and J, are their taxation increases are higher than most of the regional district to fund to help fund those reserves and those capital projects.
Yes, go ahead.
Just through the chair, one comment would be, one change you'll see in this financial plan is that you'll see interest on reserves in the services, which was not previously shown.
Yes, so we've added that to the, we just finished yesterday adding that to the actuals for last year. So the financial plan for, once the final draft that goes to the board next week will include that interest income, but that interest income will flow straight into reserves because it is an inflation adjustment on those reserves. And it's not really because the cost of our maintenance, our capital projects, it is exceeding inflation. So we're not keeping up with it as it is. So even at that level.
Could you tell me if the decision is made at the regional district level or if it's provincial level in terms of the determination of what?
Which regional district level?
That would be okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
With limitations guided by the province.
Yeah, exactly.
Very good question.
Yes, go ahead.
Are we passing on that interest income or is the region?
No, we're not. So that's a great question. And so when the regional district, when we're getting 5 or 5.5% of our investments, that somebody's personally taxed at 30, that's equivalent to somebody making 7.5%. And keeping in mind we're largely risk-free investments.
Yeah, so you're not paying the region's.
No, we're not paying income tax on our.
That's the net gain.
Yeah.
Yes, just a second. Area I had their hand up. And I've been meaning to go to them, but I don't see them, so maybe. Okay, no, I guess not. It dropped off. Okay, go ahead, Brian.
I'm just wondering what the 59 million invested, what is it invested in and how secure is it?
I think I talked about that earlier. So we have the latter GICs, which are guaranteed investment certificates at least A- financial institutions in Canada. So we're spread, I think, amongst 6 different institutions. We have investments with the Municipal Finance Authority of British Columbia, which I believe is also an AA+ rated organization. And then the rest are in various other financial institutions. In savings accounts, as I mentioned earlier, we negotiated with our institutions. We've got a rate over 5% across our, or most of our accounts. So we have high interest savings accounts and operating accounts. And then, as many of you are aware, in your personal lives, go to the bank and there's often a menu of 6 different type of accounts, and you have to always move your money and figure out, what I need this money for, and if I need it today. And so we basically told our institution, we said, we don't want to do that. Just give us the highest rate on everything. And that way we're not having to move money back and forth. You guys figure out, well, whatever happens, what happens. We get our taxes in for the province in August, and they deplete until the next July. You know what our cash flow rate is. You figure it out on your own. Just pay us the 5% plus on our investments, and that's what they're doing.
So the majority of the GIC?
No, about 20% in GICs.
So what's the 80%?
And so another 20% is with the Municipal Finance Authority, and then the remaining 60% is with basically high interest savings accounts.
All right, I'm going to move on from reserves. Thank you for those questions. All right, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Quick slide. We mentioned the strategic plan earlier on, so that's going to help guide and direct work plans and board direction. Okay, so we will go through various services. We'll start with S100, which is general administration. So this includes corporate administration, finance, IT, HR, CEO's office, and municipal directors. So again, the 6.2 wage increase, mileage rate from CRA's increase, some training, increased spend on IT and cybersecurity and transition to Microsoft 365. I'll touch upon this to give an example of where inflation is actually, about 1,000%. So Microsoft products, years ago, you would buy, for instance, we bought Office 2016 about 8 years ago. It cost, I don't know, $300 or $400. You use it for 8 years. That works out to about, this is per person, about $50 per year per person. A couple of years ago, Microsoft said, we're no longer going to support that. If you use it, it's a security risk. You need to move to Microsoft 365. So we evaluated our other options. And so we've gone from about $50 a year per person to about $50 per month per person. And so that's an additional about $225,000 a year in licensing costs for Microsoft 365. So that's more than just Excel and Word. It includes a bunch of security products, Teams and other things, but that cost is just one example where it's not a 5% increase, it's 1,000% increase for not an insignificant portion of our spend. So $70,000 is budgeted for the completion of the new website that was approved last year by the board. So that the plan is to complete that this year. So the overall increase in this service is 11%. And I'll make a note. So this service is partially funded by taxation, and about 70% of this service is distributed to a bunch of other services so that they're fully costed. So for instance, if you look at the waste resource recovery service, there's a line transferred from from general admin. So a portion of these costs flow to, again, resource recovery, recreational services, fire services, and a bunch of other services. S101 is rural admin. So this is the rural directors, regional fire services, and bylaw services. Good news story is we were successful with a $474,000 fire training grant. So that's going to support staff wages, equipment, and other training costs. Those expenses all live in the services as well as the grant. They offset each other. So there's a 15% total increase in requisitions driven by full staffing complement. So we've got a full staffing level of bylaw officers and fire regional fire services, and there's some funding set aside for a command unit. Sorry, that's a vehicle for regional fire or deputy regional fire chiefs. The areas E and F, they participate in building inspection. The city of Nelson has its own building inspection service. So this service has seen a 20% taxation increase driven by two factors. The fairly large decrease in permit level fees, and we are now fully staffed in the service. There's been a fair level of turnover in the services, and the service delivery model has suffered. So there was a fairly large demand both from the director level and the public level that the service level increased. So we are now last year hired additional staff, and they're now onboarded. So we have an increase in costs, and as I think Director Graham mentioned earlier, this 20% increase is after a contribution from reserves to offset the taxation increase. Otherwise, we'd be looking, I believe, at a 40% taxation increase in this service. Planning is showing a 2% decrease, working on various projects, including we talked about some legislation and changes in housing regulation. So there's some funding available from the province to help with that. And so staff is working on that and on numerous other projects. GIS is next, 2% taxation increase. So there will be a strategic assessment taking place of the GIS service this year and helping establish new funding models.
Very quick question with GIS. Thanks. I may be incorrect. Please tell me if I'm incorrect. But I understand GIS services are provided by the province. So I don't actually understand why there's a GIS department.
Various reasons. So my sort of understanding of it is we're not able to fully utilize the provincial GIS service the way we can customize our own maps and use for planning and development and for fire services. So we can go in and integrate our various systems into our own GIS system, which we can do with the provincial one. So you look at most municipalities across the provinces or regional districts all have a GIS service. So this regional district, Central Kootenay, is not an outlier from that perspective.
Yeah, so thank you. So fire services, I'm just curious, like what other things are in there?
Utilities,
Yeah. Fire, okay, utilities.
like it's a layer of data.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yes,
The
please
province
go ahead.
provides the landscape of data in terms of what's going on with the terrain and highways and all of their assets, and then we add in additional layers, what's going on with water utilities and fire utilities and service areas, and we're adding in more data. And we don't integrate that into a larger provincial model. We just import their data and add our layers on top. And then the cities add their layers on top of those.
Okay, thank you. So the extra layers, like, can we get an idea what all the things are that you plan to add, or just keep them on forever?
I don't have that list in front of me. So there's ongoing projects. So if there's a parks project in play, then GIS will work in parks with the Parks Department and provide GIS services, say, to help map new trails or other developments in that park. So it's sort of an ongoing process. So there's some functions of it have been there over the years, and others are new initiatives that require GIS services. And then we could use our GIS department to deliver those, help the various departments deliver their projects and initiatives.
Good, thank you.
Local conservation fund, so this recently expanded include Area F, funded by parcel taxes. And there's a bit of process in looking at establishing a local conservation fund committee. And under $30,000 was awarded for 8 projects this coming year.
Yes, go ahead.
So I'm Carlson from Area E. So I read the definition of parcel tax on the provincial website, provincial government website. And it says that one may only be levied on the properties that are currently receiving or have a reasonable opportunity to receive a specific service. For example, if it was a line, it's there from the property and the property is not connected to that line, but could connect, then the property could be taxed, partial tax. For example, for me, I have nothing in terms of service. We are at the bottom of the road. I have no service, no reasonable service to be offered. Though I looked into my tax from last year and I saw it several line, which now I understand that it's going into a conservation fund. But it's not a service to me. And from these services, it's like a bad habitat, grizzlies in the lardo.
I'm sorry, I'm not quite getting your question.
My question is, why do I have to pay for bad habitat, grizzly, coordinated?
Well, it went to referendum in 2014 for area E, D, and A. Just recently H and F. And the voters said yes to the parcel tax. The government approved the referendum. So it was a legal referendum for a legal allowed usage. And that's how it came to be. Now you can agree or disagree, but at this meeting, we can't debate that.
That's what I'm saying. It was still like, so it was a referendum that was saying that we can divert the money from the definition, clear definition of.
Well, the province approved it, so if it's their definition, they must have felt that it was a general benefit to the citizens of a given area. They approved the referendum and the referendum passed in the 3 areas. So there's no real discussion we can have at this table.
Not here in this area when the referendum was taking place. That's why I asked.
Yeah, so that's the background to it.
So now the citizens cannot change their minds. If you make a mistake, let's say if I make a mistake and I do an investment in the bank and that bank doesn't do the return I want, then I would be penalized then.
Well, Joan talked briefly about a service that is created is not the easy process to uncreate because the citizens said they wanted it. So I don't know the legal side, maybe someone does on getting rid of a service, but once you establish it, as people have spoken and they've said, we want this service. So it's a bit beyond the scope of this budget meeting to talk about the legalities of that, okay?
And just like to see if there is any ways that actually ask the people again, maybe the people didn't understand at the time, especially it wasn't in place and the inflation was not at a very high and everybody.
And I offer that we tried to answer as best we can, so I've heard your point. I don't think we can go any further, so I'd like to move on because we've got many pages, so.
Sure, I just like to end it can be further discussed in your.
No.
board of directors?
It can't be because the people said they wanted it, so it is actually a service that is in place. Now, maybe you can pull the community, the province and municipal affairs and say, how do we get rid of this thing? But I think the answer will be, people voted for it, so that's pretty well it. There's no recall.
Tom, it is a fixed $50 per lot. Yeah, so do you understand that? It's fixed. It doesn't rise. It's per lot, $15 per lot per year. I'm not for it. Just to clarify that it doesn't rise with inflation. It stays at $15.
Thanks for that, Jim. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Okay, I'm going to
Thank you.
move the meeting along. You're welcome.
Community sustainability, so this is, areas E+F, so no change in taxation, so a number of projects, protection of drinking water and watersheds, 4 projects there, climate action. As most people are aware, we went through a fairly large, public, engagement process last year, so staff are working compiling that. So report should be coming in the next month or 2. Yeah, and a couple other initiatives there. And as well, some other initiatives on this are in food and agriculture as well as energy.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so we have a vote on this budget next week. We also been listening to all of the area meetings and listening to different directors speak. In terms of the sustainability expense, it was supposed to have been funded by a grant, but it looks like actually some of those expenses have been moved into taxation. Amy Watson mentioned that there was 180,000 that was coming out of taxation to cover some of these costs. We've heard from many directors on these meetings that have been saying this really is not beneficial because we are already implementing sustainable practice in what we do. So when you have assets, you are being responsible and you're planning ahead. We're already doing that. The climate action plan, we have several statements from many directors that have said that this climate action guidance has not actually created any benefit to the taxpayer. And even in Sherry Amata's presentation in the January meeting, when it was asked by the board of directors, what data can you show to us that we have actually made any progress in reducing emissions since 2018 when the program started? She was unable to provide any evidence. We have statements from many directors that they would get rid of that climate action plan right now. So, but what we have is we have a budget going through next week. So we're not even dealing with these votes yet until after the budget goes through. Now, this is about process. So as far as I understand, the way that service is implemented in is the only way that it can be taken out. So I'm going to use, for example, this construction, the utilities crew that was the pilot project for the last 3 years. So in January of 2020, the statement in the note, in the agenda minute says that staff directed the board to create this service. And it became a dedicated allocation service. So this was implemented by the board, just like the climate action and just like the sustainability. Now, over the process of the implementation of the service, it was determined that you could not really provide this service due to staffing issues. There's a list of reasons here. But the subsequent response was now that staff brought to the board that we should now rescind this service. We should close it down. And that's what was decided. That service is now gone. So I would like to clarify that if the board moves the budget through next week. And within the next month, it comes to the directors that actually the sustainability expense and the climate action expense are all programs that are not to our advantage anymore. That we can follow the same process because it was implemented by the staff to the board, that we could do the same thing to rescind them.
I think we need to can I just speak briefly and then?
Please go ahead.
So we need to separate those two. So the utility service was not a service with a legislative service in the same as our S services. It's an A service. It was an allocation pilot project service set up to support the utilities. So it does not, it's not something that's voted by the public. It's something as a pilot project, the board decided to do that, to be funded by the 20 different water utilities. So it versus the sustainability service is a service with a bylaw and the various areas pay for it. So for the sustainability service to go away is a much longer and different process than for an A service to go away. So we can't relate an A service to an S service. So.
What is the process?
Each service is different for an area pulling back from a service. So I can't speak in generalities. So there's things like service reviews, much smaller. The larger service and the more participants participating in it, and the more difficult it is to remove that service. The number of assets and debt and reserves in the service also make it difficult to pull out of the service. A much smaller service, I'm not going to name any because it'll be picking on one, that one area participates in. There's potentially a speedier process. There's potentially a petition that we want a referendum done, and then there's a referendum process. So to pull out of a service, it depends on the service, and some are going to be much more difficult than others. But the board can't just say we don't want the service anymore. It needs to go through, for the most part, at least a referendum to pull out for each area that wants to pull out of the service. That's my understanding of it anyway.
So, just to be clear, of what I'm hearing you say, we'll observe this, and what you would like for next Thursday at the budget meeting is that you, just to be clear, are not in favor of the climate action plan and any expenses that would be increasing our taxation toward climate, anything to do with the climate action plan as discussed over the last 6 or 8 months.
I'm saying.
Is that a summary of what you were saying?
To meetings with the other areas that directors have been saying that. And
Yeah, well, they can vote. What I want to know is what do you think? Because those directors have a voice at the table and they can say, don't want to pay for it. Or that part of it.
Right,
So
but I don't have the vote.
that's why I'm asking you specifically
Yes.
at this meeting, public input, so that we can hear what you're.
Since your staff, your senior energy specialist was unable to provide any data that the climate action plan was actually achieving anything. Based on that, I would say that I personally am not in favor of the current climate action plan.
Thank you. Okay, noted, for sure. Just separating budget meeting from other meetings, it's a budget meeting. So we can only go so far astray in regard to other parts of conversations and validities and what have you. Now it's mostly trying to help people understand the taxation implications of what's coming up on Thursday. So thank you. Go ahead, yeah.
Okay, so we'll jump over to emergency management, where the cost for our tract and A 101, but for each area or group of areas, they're funded from a number of S services. So for E and F, and a small portion of Nelson pays in for a small portion of this is funded out of S 160. There's an overall 36% taxation increase in S 160. So this service is mainly one of the main responsibilities is planning, preparing for the potential of seasonal flooding, wildfires, and drought. One of the main pieces, again, of legislation, we talked about legislation earlier on, that's going to impact this service is the Emergency and Disaster Management Act, which is going to impact that planning, the risk assessments, various coordination and consultation activities, as well as updating bylaws and policies. So we're in the middle of going through that, as well as the regional district is, the directors could speak to this a bit further, went through a workshop and have some concerns with the province and have relayed those concerns back to the province. So we're still going through and understanding that how it's going to impact us, potentially what funding we are not going to receive from the province to help implement that act. Some other initiatives are the Neighborhood Emergency Preparedness Program, Fire Smart, and as well as wildfire resilience plans.
All right. Okay, carry on.
Okay, so S187 is the Central Resource Recovery. So that's the waste recycling organics for the Nelson, EFG, Salmo, Caslo, and up to Area D is the central region, sub-region. We have three, we have East, Central, and West. So for Central, we're seeing a 10% taxation increase and 10% tipping fee increase, a number of projects initiatives, some remediation works, and also late last year, the West Compost Facility operations began near Salmo. Some diversion projects, repairs to transfer stations, equipment, legacy landfill assessments. I'll speak to that a little bit. So even predating the regional district, there is a bunch of legacy landfills, I think about 8 or more, that the regional district via regulation is responsible for. So to make sure that they're in a state that's not causing undue damage. So we're having to go do these assessments and potentially do remediation works on that. So these assessments are starting this year, and those assessments will then potentially drive future works. And as well, we're doing assessments at Central Landfill and looking at some new septic management options.
Yep, garbage, big ticket item, yeah, go ahead.
We're in a bit of a squeeze, because we're having to recover costs for services that happened years ago that we weren't involved in. So we have to cover that, and we're also having to put money in the fund for the future. I definitely feel my middle age here. Recycle BC issue. And
Just pause for a moment. Do you have a separate recycling one, or is it lumped in?
It's lumped into this, yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
so I got this information from Amy Watson because I was not aware of the change in legislation, but there was a producer pay policy that was implemented by the BC Liberal government, which meant then through this program for recycling, it was delivered to the consumer as being, this whole program has a cost recovery basis, which means the product that is recycled will cover the cost of all of the processing that's required. What has been happening is that instead the taxpayers have been paying, according to Amy and according to Director David Ock last night, at least $1 million per year, subsidizing the cost of this recycling program. Now, this has been going on for years. I'd like to know how many years it's been going on and how many millions of dollars that the RDCK should have been reimbursed for this program that it is not received and that we are still subsidizing. And is it time now to look at possibly implementing another strategy because the whole Recycle BC program itself has changed. They're no longer shipping stuff overseas. They're no longer processing a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff is just being incinerated down there and we're driving it down for them. So it's, how many years have we been subsidizing? So what's the total amount of money?
Well, we'll do a quick summary here. So before I was on the board, chair. Who was the chair before, I got on the board? Odin Creston. Anyway, I'm just.
Chair Kettle.
Kettle, there we go. Thank you. I think he directed staff to build the Ministry of Environment. But anyway, so that's, I'm 10, 12, so 14 years, there's been an acknowledgement and lobbying by the RDCK that the, I guess we could say the urban-centric recycling model, which works well in some areas, didn't work as well for more rural areas. So I'd say 14 years at least, John.
My area.
Yeah, so that's first thing. We continued lobbying. We've met with the minister, a previous minister of the Liberal government, as well as the Minister Heyman in this government a number of times, plus staff. We're making some headway, but it's a challenge. Even our core depots don't break even, and then our satellite depots, which is our choice to put the extra 10 or so depots out there, that's all at our cost. So we're trying, and it's expensive, and we don't feel it's fair, and we continue to lobby the Ministry of Environment and Recycle BC to pressure Recycle BC to change their model, and it seems to be a challenge. As a sidebar, just a small sidebar, I'll just take a second. Area F is going to referendum soon on a 3-stream. We'll see if it passes referendum. Model of garbage collection, recycling, and organics. And one of the benefits of that model is that we will receive, as the city of Nelson does receive money for their blue bag or their recycling process. They break even on it or come close to it, I think. We will get $50 a household if the referendum were to pass to go toward the total cost of the 3-stream program. But you point out, and Director Davidoff speaks often of it, as does Chair Watson, our perception of the inequity and the fact that our taxpayers have to pay for a recycling program. We will not abandon the recycling program. Even higher costs, talking of downstream costs, of not prolonging Urushimya landfill forever is untenable for us. So we will continue to try and increase diversion, even if it costs us at this point as we continue to lobby, because we have to keep Urushimya open forever, because you won't find another landfill. And places that don't have landfill can tell you how much. Go talk to people in Bella Coola or whatever. It's a massive cost if you don't have a landfill nearby. That's my answer. And there's a question.
On that topic about area, I'm in area H, right? So we're going through some of the thing.
Yeah, sure, that part is joined with AF to get enough numbers.
Can we then expect that you're gonna get rid of the recycling depots because now they're redundant? And the problem is gone about the recycling schemes?
You have to look at where recycling is. If Groman becomes a core, it's more complicated than simply saying we can close them.
It's something the board could look at, right?
Definitely, in fact, we technically are closing one satellite depot May 1st at Kokanee Park.
And there is this referendum coming up, and that's as part of that.
If it were to pass, we would then begin to look at satellite depots.
Yeah,
Yes.
the depot no longer needed.
And we hope to expand the curbside to many more areas. Yeah, but anyway, that was a sidebar. Thank you for the question, and thank you for highlighting one of the costs that's out of our control, or largely out of our control, that is property taxpayers are paying for recycling. Okay, yeah,
Thank you. I'll continue on.
yeah, I'll try and stop talking.
So Nelson and District Recreation, S226, 5% taxation increase. Joe, do you want to speak to these or? Since you're here.
Answer question?
Okay, let's do that.
Allow me to speak.
We should move along, so these are the things that are part of it. You can summarize.
Okay, I'll summarize it, and if there's any questions, we'll get some here to answer. So we've got the Nelson Recreation Campus Study, so project goal to conduct a needs assessment to identify the path forward as far as how the campus amenities could best serve the recreation needs and interests of the community. The project will start this year, completed in December, and we've again set up an engagement platform online for this particular initiative. And so recreation services in general, so revenue exceeded budget expectations last year for user fees, and 2024 budget reflects a further increase. Rental income has also increased modestly, and programming continues to develop various initiatives and programs. And we'll talk a bit about asset management for recreation. So for the Nelson facility, we're looking at a boiler replacement for $400,000, some rooftop HVAC units, so heating, air conditioning units, ventilation, and some refrigeration plant engineering, planning for future plant renovations.
All right. So that would be the biggest tax portion for an Area F resident would be contributing to this facility in Nelson.
Could we consider going to maybe private contractors running each facility, because the cost is getting beyond what we can afford. I think it puts a lot of stress on the RDCK to come up with staff. It's unusual that regional districts are running the recreational facilities. It's usually under the umbrella of the municipality. And it seems that, I know that there is talk that, you know, you can share resources or supplies, but the trajectory is that it's going to become that we cannot afford recreation expenses if it keeps going at this rate. It will end up not having them. And so if we at least possibly bring in a private contractor where the regional district gives a set amount to each facility, and then it's up to the municipality to either come up through taxation or fundraising within their local community or whatever they want to do. It's also worthwhile, I think, for the regional district to create a charitable donation where people want to give donations for these kinds of projects. They could at least get a tax receipt for it. But
Thank you. We won't fade it. It's an idea, and that's what tonight's, and you highlight that recreation is costly.
Tom,
Thank you.
Tom, I have a question as well. When I voted, and I might get stoned leaving here, but I voted for the facility back in 2003.
Yeah, correct.
And I voted it because I was told that it would be $100 assessment for it would work out, average out to $100 assessment per property. But I thought, well, that's a reasonable contribution, and I assumed that it was a fixed term that would be a 25 years, we get the thing built, and then that would stop flowing. Well, I'm now paying, I think, $950 or something per year. And is that going up again as well? Is that tied to the increase in taxation? Is the 9.2%? Does that include that fee as well?
Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, so the requisition for that service that you're talking about right now went up 5%, not 9.2. There's two pieces, what you were asked at the time of referendum was the amount for the borrowing cost. So you remember that when you were already paying for the pool, and the fitness center already. What the referendum was for was to pay for the borrowing cost and the operations of an arena. So that was what was the ABCC. So all of those pieces though are together. So what you were already paying for plus what you approved the expansion of that service to be are all included in that. So for example.
So it's the 5% taxation from Nelson Recreation Camp study.
Oh, sorry, no,
That whole service.
that's the service, the study is what, part of that 5% study, but it was actually previously budgeted here. But that amount is the requisition increase for that service. So one of the things that happens, you're right, so that long-term borrowing starts to expire in 2028, I believe, is the first, when we borrowed in chunks. So is the first borrowing that comes off. So that comes off in 2000.
So is it actually going to reduce that amount?
It could, but the only thing is you now have, but just to be, you were talking about asset management. That building's 25 years old. Like, so that refrigeration plant, like, here's the thing about borrowing. We borrowed longer than what some of the assets lifespan was.
Yep.
So for example, the refrigeration plants, their lifespans, particularly after what happened in Purdy, what we call the technical safety says, we should be replacing those every 20 years. So that's shorter than what we actually borrowed the money to pay for them. Yeah. So we do have this next few years is a little bit of a struggle. So that project, which right now we've got for 2026, is $1 million.
So the forecast actually is that this is going to continue rising.
Yeah. And so just, and there's two pieces to it. It's actually not the operational part that's actually driving the big, it's the asset management piece across all the services. If you heard the discussion even last night in Castlegar, it's actually about the asset management pieces where the argument is.
So not operational, it's the actual.
It's keeping the building
Infrastructure attached to it.
Yes, yeah.
Like, anyway.
That's where there's tremendous.
My two bits.
Yeah.
This is getting excessive. I agree.
Well, no, and through the chair, that's why commissions, the board, staff, that's why at the very beginning, when you talked about that asset management piece that's coming together. So for example, this Christmas, we demolished a building. We're trying to look at what those pieces are. That study is about talking to the public about what are those core pieces that you want? Because indoor recreation is expensive. And so we realize that, and the commissions do as well. So that's why it's really important to engage in those things. So for example, like we know what drives revenue, and those pieces are clear. Our community is changing, and in order for those facilities to be sustainable, they need to be used, and they need to be used a lot. If they're not used, that starts creating that gap for expenditures. So that's why we're doing these big projects, in particular in Castlegar and Nelson.
And I use it as much as I can.
I'm glad you're there.
Great, I'm gonna move this along. Thank you very much. Go ahead, yeah. Thanks.
All right. So parks, S202, 14% taxation increase. So, Cottonwood Lake, accessibility project largely completed. Great Northern Trail, some brushing work and kiosks, Sunshine Bay. Some washroom completed and fence replacement on tap for this year. Tagum Beach parking lot design work to continue. And Morning Mountain, some xeriscape landscaping and winter rink activities planned for 2024. And then just briefly touching on regional parks, trail and water access strategy. So there's some overarching projects to identify strategic direction and provision of regional park services, including community parks, regional trails, and developing a service model for delivering the operations planning and development for parks and trails that meet existing and future needs, and emphasizing financial stability, sustainability is an integral element of this strategy. I think it's the next chart. So this chart basically, or this graph shows the growth of parks in the regional district over the years. So fairly flat for the first 20 years, but going back, looking back over the last 30 years, a fairly significant growth in area and number of parks to manage, and hence the overall strategic planning that we're looking at doing. Okay, we'll briefly touch upon the water utility services. So again, with water utilities, we have some really small water utilities, medium size and fairly large. The larger ones are in the Preston area. But anyway, New Hamel Water, 5% user fee increase and 15% parcel tax, and some water line replacement plan for 2024. Balfour Water, 13.5 user fee and 5% parcel tax. Primary increases inflation, and with the Wharf Road project costing more than anticipated. And a couple others, Woodland Heights Water, 4% user fee increases, no increase in parcel tax. Grandview Water, 15% meter charge increase, 0 parcel tax increase, and almost half of the rate increase is due to inflation, and less user fee revenue was increased in 2023 due to lower water demand. Okay, we'll jump over to fire protection services. So as mentioned, we have a regional service that looks after the overall management, safety, policy, and governance as required by the Office of the Fire Commissioner, looking after the capital projects, group bulk purchasing. We've been successful in significant taxation changes by various grants. Including we're looking at small community wildfire resiliency grants we've applied for with potential additional equipment saving future taxation of about $800,000. So we're waiting to hear back on that. So we'll go through the various fire services. Basically, fire departments, some are combined. So Blewett and Beasley S144 are actually combined into 2 services, even though they span 2 electoral areas, E and F. So again, various projects, including replacement of personal protection equipment, meet regulatory requirements, building capital reserve to fund future expenditures, including apparatus replacement, and participating in some training. And similar with the Beasley Department, training, multi-year replacement of PPE and building reserves as well. All right, moving on to Balfour Harrop, S141, so 8% taxation increase, similar story, replacing equipment, and working towards procurement of a replacement of a fire engine or fire apparatus next year. North Shore, 6% increase, some energy upgrades, replacement of PPE, purchase of a smaller unit, and working towards procurement of future fire apparatus replacement for that service. I think we have one more. So defined area E, so that's area E that's immediately surrounding the city of Nelson, so part of the eastern part of Blue Earth Mountain Station, Water Road, and east. Those areas are served by the city of Nelson. So that contract, we were in a 5-year agreement, has now expired. So we're in the discussions of the city of Nelson to renew the agreement. That previous agreement, so the funding of that has fallen behind in funding a fair share of the service. So in the current plan, based on the previous agreement, there's the taxation rate is about almost 55 cents per thousand versus the other fire services in E and F are paying about 62. So we recognize there's a bit of a discrepancy with Area E's contribution to the city of Nelson. So we're in discussions with the city of Nelson about how we will close that gap. And so we're looking at a 10 to 15% increase this year in those discussions. And emergency 911, we're looking at a 9% taxation increase. So this service is seeing increased taxation, mainly driven, I'll back up, sorry, a little bit. So the regional district is responsible for procuring and providing 911 services for the rural areas and some of the smaller municipalities. And that's largely done through contracted services for 911 dispatch, which is at the South Okanagan. And so that contract rate has increased from 80,000 to 115. And our fire dispatch is through the Fraser Fort George Regional District. And that contract is increasing from 273 to 297 per thousand. There's some application support we're purchasing, as well as a GIS project to integrate the Next Gen 911 initiative, which was put into place last year with the fire services, and that bottom project will be funded through grant funding. Touch upon transit a bit. So there's a number of transit services in what we call the West Transit area. So this is everything west of Kootenay Lake. So the EF and Nelson participate in 239. So it's 7% actually taxation decrease in that service due to a use of reserves. So here's an example where the board made a decision to use some of those reserves to offset taxation increase. Otherwise, we would have been looking at about a 22% potential increase, largely driven by change of contractor providing the services, which is the city of Nelson, which includes wage increases, facility costs, and as well service expansion. With S238, which only E and F participate in, there's an 18% taxation increase, which is driven again by those increases in wages, facilities, and service expansion. Coming this year is a transit and apportionment and value study being funded by a grant to drive a more transparent and simplified cost apportionment. And part of that is also a process of starting to simplify the regional transit structure. Again, there's three services or four services in the west area, and it's a very complicated mix of services dating back several years, and lots of crisscross of which buses run through which services and various funding and portion models. So we're hoping to simplify that and make it more transparent. And as well, the West Transit Committee that looks after these services at the government level as a whole was started late last year or earlier this year. All right, we're on to the pie charts, which excuse me, show the portion of taxation in a graphical representational where each area where its taxes go, which services it go to fund. So we'll start with the city of Nelson. So this is the city of Nelson's the regional tax bill on the the city of Nelson's tax bill. So this is for shows the portion. So the large ones are the community facilities. Almost half of the regional district taxation for the city of Nelson are those facilities, parks and refuse disposal, and that gets us to about 80% of the tax bill. So per $250,000 of home value, a increase of about $16 per thousand. So we use 250. So if your home's worth 5, you multiply by 2, 750 by 3. That gives you an approximation of what your tax bill will be if you live in the city of Nelson or the regional district portion of those taxes. Of course, the city of Nelson also taxes for their services they provide, and then as well as school and hospital taxation. So we'll now look at Blue Fire. So this is Nelson, somebody living in the Nelson contract area, misspelling a Nelson there. This includes, again, so the same services before, the community facilities, the refuse disposal, and now we've added the fire protection. So those make up about 70%. And the other services, smaller portions. But as well as you can see now, the tax bill is a fair bit higher than somebody living in the city of Nelson, mainly because you are now paying the regional district for fire services, but going through the city of Nelson in this case. Somebody now living in West Blewett where the regional district is directly supplying the fire protection. So similar story, fire protection, community facilities, refuse disposal making up the bulk of the taxes. Once again, if somebody really wants to see this in detail, these slides will be available tomorrow online. And Area E Balfour. So now the fire protection is through Balfour Harrop, a slightly more efficient fire protection service, so less cost there. And now this area is not paying into the Nelson community facility. So now refuse becomes a larger portion of your tax bill, transit, and some of those administration costs. Jumping over to Area F, so Beasley Fire Protection Area, 25% fire, and you're now paying back into paying for those community facilities, refuse, and transit gets you to about 75% of your tax bill. And last but not least, Area F, North Shore Fire Protection. Similar to the last one, fire, community facilities, and refuse transit, about 75% of your tax bill. And that brings us to the end of the presentation this evening.
Any closing questions or comments? Yes, go ahead, please.
So I'm saying this and I'm not from.
Still?
It's gonna be kind of a question, kind of like this. Because like, taking a holistic approach to the whole thing, budget and population who's living in these areas or like in the RBC area. There are a lot of people who are like at the retirement age, or young families with young children, where their income is not increasing by 6.2%. That's a given. The inflation is very high and everything goes higher and higher. Food, transportation, tax. Well, we, as kind of a commitment, we said that we are gonna try to keep our elders in their own house as long as we can. But the healthcare system is already broken. So how RBCK is looking again through all these broken things. I don't know too much in the accounting thing. All I know is that a person who is left alone with a spouse debt in the retirement, and all of a sudden it gets a $4,000 extra to pay, well, in the property tax. And plus on the other bills, electricity, fees, telephone calls, we need to call the ambulance up at 8 times. How do we keep that person there? Because there is nowhere in the healthcare to put it. So, going to the question that Jim had is about the recreation centers. Do we have the RTCK does have a plan, or does it have a statistics of how many young people are using it, or like not necessarily young, but like even older or whatever? It is work for all of us, including the elders and the young families, to pay these heavy taxes instead of going to privatize it. And the person, the private person or whatever company can deal with, and they are going to look very strictly because it's about their bottom profit, what it is about. So we get rid of some of the essentials, of course, we can't get fire protection, water, garbage, whatever. But to decrease a little bit, because yes, indeed, I understand that everything is inflated and we need to keep the reserve fund, because we need to have 3 months of savings in case that something hits us, like we are fired.
I'm going to ask you to focus on, are you saying you want taxation to not go up as much as it is?
Well, I'm asking if the RBCK has any plan to look in what area can be decreased such a way the taxes are not going to be a burden on the population to the point that the people are going to be completely broke, cannot do anything, cannot pay anymore.
Well, the short answer is we as directors and the staff look at each budget of each service each year to ensure that we're getting value, we feel we're getting value. The reality is, from my perspective, after 10 years, is that taxation will increase. It is, we offer services, and as you can see, the 3 big services that we offer are pretty mandatory. Fire service, I would argue that most people make money on their tax contribution to the fire service because their house insurance is probably affected in a reduced manner, so it's at least offset, if not making money on the deal. The garbage we have to do, so that's as simple as that. We're mandated, so it's a responsibility. In the rec center, I think we all have to be careful of this is me editorializing. We have to be careful what we actually ask for, because would you actually, speaking of the elderly person, which I may consider myself, wanting medical people in town, would a doctor come here without a pool and a rink? I doubt it. And in fact, the town of Collingwood did a study and they couldn't get doctors. No, it wasn't Collingwood, it was Goderich. And they just said, we can't get doctors. So they went on a large infrastructure growth program to begin to realize we need to offer things to get these professionals to come to our town. And it worked for them, but it was by, I can't remember the exacts, whether it was another rink or another pool, right on Lake Huron, Goderich. So I think we have to be careful of seeing taxation as a cost, as opposed to there are benefits to having the parks that we have and the complexes that Joe manages and what have you. So that's my editorializing. People may agree or disagree with that. But in answer to your question, it's highly unlikely that we would ever go to a private enterprise looking after our pool. There's absolutely no evidence to show that that would reduce the costs. In fact, there might be evidence to show quite the contrary, that the public domain may be the cheapest, but that's, or least expensive. So the answer to your question is we will take your input, be aware of taxation, especially those on fixed incomes, and we will and do at each commission look at that in great detail. That's my editorializing. My advice to seniors who have a $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 house, don't pay your taxes. It's simple to defer them. It's the best interest rate in the world. And at $2,000 a year over 20 years, all you've done is taken $40,000 from your children that may inherit it. So it's the best investment you can make. So don't pay your taxes.
How does
It's
that
simple.
impact the revenue that you get?
It doesn't affect it. The government covers it, finance department through some fund. We get full funding and the government covers it and then collects on sale. So that's my little piece of advice to people. If you're really struggling, don't pay your property taxes. Go on to the deferral program, automatic renewal.
Be clear, don't go on the deferred program. Not pay your taxes. Just make sure you get that, nice, right?
Thank you for the wording assistant.
You don't want to do, I don't want to be.
Thanks, Cheryl. So why don't we, I'm gonna go. He, first, he just wanted to add to my tirade. I'm sorry, it's late.
Go ahead and add a few garnish pieces. So to your question, Annika, right?
Annika.
Yeah. So within recreation, like we're always looking for those places to be more efficient. One of the pieces you might have noticed was the utilization of recreation facility, which is driving additional revenue, which is taking pressure off taxation. We're also looking at how we do the cost apportionments and understandings between the different user groups of pool, fitness, and ice. More reporting is coming forward around specifically ice because we've been improving those financial models over time to get a clear sense of where our costs are being driven and where our financial return is coming from, so that we can be investing in places like the fitness center and looking for those opportunities. I was just talking to staff last week about sponsorship, what that looks like, how we make ourselves available for it. In order to make sure we have a clear sense of where subsidies fairly flow to users in an even fashion way, so that we're delivering services across the user groups, and I know that'll be interesting conversation when we get there. In garbage, we're looking in joint resource recovery. We have detailed specified costing reporting coming on the effectiveness and utilization rates of the different satellite or depots. We've got one right here down at Lakeside. We've got one in the Narrows. We've got a bunch of other locations. Looking at how much are they used, how much do they cost, how far are they from communities, getting really into the nitty gritty, so that we can make some choices within that other very large service to find where can we be more effective going forward. And then the final one, transit is really highlighting out, and that's a place where, you know, the concept was to have a set price. There was a private contractor providing transit services around the city of Nelson and throughout the West Kootenay area for a long time. We just were suppressed. It was very difficult. And that service is now being brought in. The contract from the RDCK perspective is changing to the city of Nelson. And so those prices are increasing. And one of the reasons that was driving it, we've seen this in recreation, is we can certainly say we want to have X service over price. You get to a point where you start getting contractors who want to bid on that project. And so there's stability in providing long-term transit services. through an organizer like the city of Nelson, but it comes with the increased cost of us having higher wage standards and higher need requirements for what facilities might look like to deliver. So we can't have buses not going up to Balfour when people expect them to go up to Balfour because people rely upon them to connect to their other communities. But there are a few examples there where we're chasing after how to make these tighter services, more effective services, and other places where we're demonstrating where the public provision of these services is the most effective, stable way to provide it long term, and that's the cheapest way long term. Anyway, those are my garnishes.
Thanks. So I'm gonna do this and then go to you, then Cheryl go and then, or go ahead, Cheryl, please.
Okay, thanks. So I disagree with some of what Tom is saying, and I think the regional district directors, we need to work harder. We need to work with the staff and we need to find ways to save money. And I think we do need to look at efficiency. Our strategic plan is looking for effectiveness and efficiency, and I think we need to do that. I own a business. So I've been doing business in this community for 20 years. I can tell you it's difficult to run a business in this area. It's even harder in Christina Lake. So I ran for office because I felt I could bring a business approach and I look at things from a business perspective. So I'm new to this and maybe in 10 years I might be saying a different story. But for me, like my whole thing here is that I hear you, I hear the public. I know that the taxes are raising faster than the levels of income, and I don't think that's sustainable. So I think as a group, we need to figure out a way to find a more sustainable way to do this job.
We've got a great board, as you can tell, diversity and wisdom. So this isn't a debate, as I clearly stated. And no, I appreciate your comment. I just no rebuttal or anything. Please go ahead.
My personal can part still. I'm going to use the term death of over 1,000 cuts. And I see these programs and these things that are coming up, and every department and every project and every group justifies all the individual projects. And everybody says, yeah, no problem. So 2% here, 3% here, and 5% here. And I would like to ask the board a comment to say, like, we looked at, if you could go back to the slide with the parks. Now, I'm not against recreation, and I'm not against having the government, and I'm not against helping people, but there's a time and a place. And right now, people are just dying because of the inflation. And so I would like to request that the board look at things with the perspective of, okay, can we put some of these things off until inflation goes down? Right? That would be the simplest approach. So like, I looked at all these, and I'm sorry if I'm offending anybody who wants these things to happen, but like, do all of these things have to get done right now? Can't they wait? So that's kind of my comment, but yeah, just as a warning.
Actually, I do like that idea, yes.
Thank you. And so just what I'm picking up, just so I'm clear, going into, like I have to process your input, that's why we're here. So I've got to make some sense of it. So the sense I'm making of those comments, and I'll just sidebar just for one moment, if I may. So at our last board meeting, a woman spoke at the public time, and what she said was, I really want the RDCK to fund full roof sprinkler systems on all the houses in the regional district, sort of subsidized.
That's actually not what she said.
That's not what she said.
She wanted to make it so that the region would buy it in bulk, so that residents could.
Right, so, well, there was, I understood it to be some funding from the regional district.
Yeah.
And even group buy. So I'm not debating that. What I'm trying to highlight is that I hear multiple voices and I'm trying to process all of those voices. And what I'm trying to do tonight myself and through trying to clarify,
Yes,
try and really get your message clearly understood. And I may have misunderstood someone else's message, but they really wanted help.
I know,
Time for the fire threat that's
I know.
imminent in this. So if I misquoted her, I misunderstood her.
Yeah.
But, so what I'm understanding is the message, hey, look at everything. Can things be put back? Can things slow down? Can acquisitions slow down? Can you put that off? Can some of these capital projects be delayed so that each year's future impact and raises are reduced?
I think that's an okay way of saying it. It's just, now is not the time when inflation is through the roof. Like,
Thank
you've lived through times when inflation wasn't like this. You know, Canada's target's supposed to be 2%. Well, this at least, we feel it's maybe 3 or something, right?
Yeah.
Now just doesn't seem to be the time to be doing all of these things. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. So this is, we are complete. We are wrapping up. So these are closing comments for the directors and staff to hear as we get ready for next Thursday's approval process. So yes, go ahead.
Thanks. We have put out this request and only were able to get a few responses back in time for this meeting, but I did want to share some of these numbers. These are other regional districts. So the regional district of the Okanagan, Similkameen, has a population of 90,000, just over 90,000, and they have 111 staff. The Fraser Valley Regional
Can I just
District-
pause for a minute?
No.
So is your, no, just a second here. I'm chair. So what you're, no, I'm chair. Hey,
Really?
I'm not,
Are we gonna pull that?
no. What I'm saying is,
Okay,
I'm
it's
chair.
noted.
I'm chair. So what I'm trying to clarify before you go on reading statistics and what have you. And I, as chair, have that responsibility to the meeting to see what I'm hearing you say, what I think I'm going to hear you say is that the RD is overstaffed. And you're going to cite examples of that. And show that other areas have less staff with more population or what have you. If you just want to say we're overstaffed, then that'll be duly noted and we will take that back. But it is extremely difficult for we as directors to compare regional districts because the ways in which they provided service are different. So I interrupted you because those comparisons are like comparing apples and oranges, and as such, they may highlight a point which I've tried to clarify is, hey, is there ways you can reduce the size of the regional district so that property taxation burden will be less on people? We have heard that message. What I don't want to do is compare apples and oranges and then impose that request on apples and oranges when it is not the same thing. That's why I interrupted you. So if you feel that it's important to highlight your message in another way, I will give you a couple of minutes to close your statement saying the RD is overtaxing its people with your piece of evidence. And
Would the
go
regional
ahead.
district be willing to work with the top 3 regional district performers in the province to actually get some mentoring or input or teaching on ways that actually might help you in the process of trying to increase your efficiency?
I will turn that over to Yep to talk to the CAO. So that's a comment that someone from the public said, are we as efficient as we can be? And they're wondering that. And unless you have a comment that I didn't want to impose that on you after 2 years. I know Stuart, after 10 years, talking to every regional district on committees with every CAO, has a very good handle on the efficiencies and what have you, so I didn't want to put you on the spot with that, but maybe you could pass it on to Stuart as.
I'm taking minutes.
And you're taking minutes. Yeah, so thank you. Supplemental with your last 30 seconds or minute? We're hoping to wrap
Yeah,
up
my
at 9.
question would be, how, when you are having a meeting with the public, how does that procedure, how should it maybe adapt to working, to having public discussions versus your normal?
Well, that's what I did tonight in Richmond or some other place. What they would have done is put the document out. One of the approaches they may have taken, and which they often take, is that they put a document out and say, we want feedback, and here's your 5 minutes to give us your feedback, which we could have done tonight with the document, but I wanted a more conversational approach, which we're hoping to accommodate so that people can have a dialogue to a certain extent. We may differ, and that's where debate, I tried to draw the line between dialogue and debate. Because debate, we won't settle anything. I disagree with a perspective, or you disagree with their perspective, unlikely that'll change. But the dialogue, that's what I've been trying to get clear is, what is your message to us in a dialogue? So I think that's the difference. You're welcome. Yes, go ahead.
I'm Randy DeLong.
Hi, Ryan.
I'd just like to reinforce what everybody's saying. And I know our taxes have doubled in the last 10 years. And, you know, when I go through what costs are, the RDCA has doubled their section. Police is the same, you know, hospitals is the same, but the RDCA has doubled the amount of their taxes. I mean, you can turn on the news every day, you have people, you know, a lot of elderly people going to food banks. And all of a sudden their, you know, the taxes are going up every year and they don't have any extra income coming in. Well, they're going to retire for 20 or 30 years. They've owned their property for 50, 60 years. And those costs are going up every year. And they have people. And that's, you know, that's where I think, you know, every section of government, whether it be the BCEA or provincial and federal, they've got to look at that and what they're doing to, what they're doing to the middle class. Talk about elevating the middle class and how much they're making, and they're taking it away. It's going down every year.
Thank you. And underlining the message. So my summary, would you say that it would be accurate to what you were saying as well? That I kind of heard that part of it?
I think so.
Good. Yeah, just trying to clarify for sure. Anyone else with a thought, closing thought? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Craig Seahouse, Nelson. How far, anyway, appreciate the meeting and appreciate the effort to engage with the public. How far out is the strategic planning? So you talked about, I heard asset management quite a bit tonight, which makes perfect sense. That's just looking at infrastructure and lack of investment in that. Make up and plan for the future, you know, the most proactive way. How far out is the strategic planning? So for example, when people are being told your taxes are, rates are going up in different ways, they're going to account for these different costs associated with that. You know, that catches a lot of people by surprise. I'm sure everybody goes through this every year. So how far out in front of some of these things can we get? In a sense, when we talk about transparency, when you're running a business, to your point, and I've run plenty of them myself, like you try to forecast out 3, 5, 10 years to try and understand how are you planning. You go through a budget process every year to make sure, yes, we're on track for that, or this has changed last year based on performance. But how far out is?
Let me answer.
Yeah.
For our water systems that you have pointed out that we own 20 of them, as we begin the asset management plan, we actually are going out 100 years on the depreciation and 50 years. And so the water systems have taken the lead in the asset management side. Joe will tell you that, yeah, we're starting to get a pretty good idea on the asset management side on a swimming pool, those expensive things. And we anticipate this year to be able to project out many years. But we're already out in 27, 28, the coolers, the chillers, all of that. In our waste recovery, we're out pretty far in our projections in our 5-year and maybe even up to 10-year plan. I think West Resource is talking about things out 10 years. So in a way, it's service by service. It's like the RD isn't a thing, it's 200 things. And each of them are trying to get ahead of the curve. And as I said earlier, my goal is to make sure that the person using it today is paying the full cost for their use of it so that it's not dumped on not put out on someone 20 years from now. And that becomes the challenge. But we are, I would say, in the 10 years I've been on the board, we're really, I think, doing a better job of that kind of projection. So thanks for the comment, and that's duly noted. Are you looking forward and planning forward?
Mystery out of what,
Yeah, no, good.
sort of like,
Yeah.
right? And then people can decide. I think that's a great idea.
No, that's a good point, and that adds to the transparency. That's a really good point. You're really projecting that out. I don't know.
The plan itself is 5 years.
Pardon me?
The overall plan is 5 years.
Yeah.
From the larger scale, that's all.
Which is, again, by legislation, we're required to do a 5-year plan at the end.
Right, but you've got those 4 big expenses or services that you offer, right?
Well, fire truck costs $750 and we only last 25 years, so. Yeah, the big money. Did you want to add?
No,
Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate people showing up, communicating, dialoguing with us, giving information, perspective, insight, ideas, concepts.
thanks to Director Newell for chairing the meeting.
Oh, yeah, thank you. You're very welcome. Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks very much. And you can email us anytime, tnewell@rdc. Oh, why, man? That's the end of the line. So.
I'll read them over.